Good morning. This is the Committee of the Whole work session, supporting community through quality public service. I'll call this meeting to order March 18th at 10:30 a.m. We have on our agenda today, we have our minutes from the February meeting. Our discussions today will be with snow removal policy, road jurisdiction, and the Scheef Parcel Sawtooth Bluff Master Plan. So we can open up with the snow removal policy that has come into effect is a discussion.
Wonderful, thank you. We're actually we're gonna listen to Matt today. Matt's been working a lot on this. We worked this through, Highway Advisory Committee, I think a few different times, and so get those comments incorporated. And so then kind of the next step for us is to come here and see if there's any comments you all have, and then we can incorporate those. If they're minor enough or if there's no changes, we'll bring it to the board next week, get this thing adopted and move on to our next, we're working through all our policies right now. So I'll turn it over to Matt.
Yeah, so there was an existing snow removal policy that the Highway Department was operating under. It was more than 15 years old, I believe, and sort of poorly written. And so we are, hopefully nobody wrote it here. So we wanted to just do a rewrite, but then also reflect any slight changes in service level and how things were worded. So that's how this came out. It ideally defines both, our overall goal of taking snow and removing it from the road, but then also kind of like what the public should expect from us and kind of the timing. Because, sometimes we'll get calls from the end of the Gunflint Trail that says, when should we expect to see you? And it's nice to at least have a policy that says, well, you probably won't see us at 8 in the morning, although pretty close. So I don't know that we need to go over this line by line unless anybody feels like there's a detail in here that you want to pull out, but I'll just kind of briefly go over everything. Again, objective, remove snow. Routes, we have different routes, so that determines the timing of when different areas get cleared. There's really no way around that. It takes us 8 hours to basically kind of do first pass over everything. And some roads, especially the high traffic like Gunflint Trail up the hill, get hit more often and sooner. Other places, side roads don't get hit right away, but by noon they will be cleared, generally speaking, as long as the snow is stopped. Some prioritization occurs mostly with buses. So we are in conversation with ISD 166 frequently in terms of bus stops, because those change year to year and even semester to semester. So that's one of our kind of the things we pay more attention to. Also, this policy does talk about our responsiveness to the Sheriff's Department dispatch. So if after hours you want to get a hold of the Highway Department, you go through dispatch gets a hold of us. There's a process for that. Talks a little bit about the resources, so what the county owns, maintains for snow removal, so it sets expectations.
Do you want to touch on just the hours of operation for the sake of whether or not everybody knows it here? Or anyone that's
sure.
Listening? Sure.
So again, this just reflects sort of what has become practice. So during a snow event, we dispatch, we see it coming, we dispatch at 4 a.m. with the goal of making the roads safe by the time people are either going to work or buses are out picking kids up for school. We generally speaking will stop removing snow by 4 p.m. and that's a big difference between us and MnDOT. MnDOT does shift work, so they're keeping Highway 61 open 24 hours a day once snow occurs. We don't do shift work. We do call out, so we call people out at 4 a.m. But then by the end of their workday, which is 3:30, generally speaking, unless there's the exception, like certain routes like the Gunflint Trail on the hill might be opened a little bit later. And again, that's just to avoid doing that shift work, union negotiation, all that stuff.
Thanks.
Yep. And then, again, if there's a need, we will be dispatched past 4 PM, but that, we rely on dispatch to let us know when there's really an issue. So, yeah, and then, again, down to operations, defines, when we call out, which is after 2 inches of snow has fallen. Road surfaces, we have a lot of gravel in this county, even relative to other counties. We treat gravel differently than asphalt. Again, back to MnDOT. MnDOT really has a complete snow, like a bare street policy. And so like their goal is to remove all snow and ice from a roadway, whereas a gravel road, you really don't want to do that because you start to remove gravel. And in the summer, what are we doing? We're putting gravel on roads. So we're trying ideally not to remove it. So we maintain what's called a winter road, which is a hard pack roadway. Yeah, that protects the investment of gravel that we have in our roads. Does it require you drive a little bit differently? And is there a learning curve with driving on a winter road versus a bare road? Yes, absolutely. But that's one of the joys of visiting Cook County. Yeah. So, also, obviously, a big investment of the county is salt sand. Put a lot of that down every year, but we want to kind of adjust people's expectation. More salt sand doesn't always equal more traction. So, we're using it on corners and intersections, generally speaking, and hills, but we're not spreading it out over the whole roadway, the length of County Road 60 for however many people drive that on a daily basis. First of all, we can't afford it. We can't maintain that supply of salt sand, but also you got diminishing returns based on different conditions. So again, that's just mentioning salt sand and how we use it. Cutting down banks seasonally, different roads, different widths, depending. And yeah, talks a little bit about what residents are responsible for, i.e. mailboxes, fire numbers, that kind of thing. And then also just a nod to the city, because we work closely with the city, having their policies at least represented in here. We're not trying to work contrary, we're trying to work in tandem. So mention their parking ordinance. Yeah. Everything else, just call us. That's basically what it says. Does anybody have questions?
Commissioner Gamble?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Matt, Robbie. So what I'd like to know is the document 15 years ago, whatever, when you reviewed that document compared to this document, what are the significant changes? When you looked at it and you saw it and you said, is it just wordsmithing or is it really more directed to policy?
I would say wordsmithing mostly, but then also slight changes in hours of operation, just reflecting more of what we currently do.
Okay.
And I can't remember the details of where that change happened, but there was something odd about after 4 p.m. only if X, Y, Z or whatever.
Yeah.
And really it's not
clarify.
that. Yeah, just trying to clarify
Yeah.
and also just concise bullets rather than
Yes.
long
Right.
answers
You can get it
hidden in
quicker.
paragraphs.
Yeah.
This is a page and a half, so.
Has our service changed since then? Probably not,
Yeah.
appreciably.
And so what influenced it other than just the wordsmithing is that if you look at the union component of it and the hours and shifts, and you look at what the lived experiences informed, if all of that seems to be an assessment in all those areas, this is what we end up with, and that
Exactly.
certainly makes sense. So,
Yep.
And I think including some of the stuff you'll see, like Matt had mentioned, like the city parking rules, for example, making
Yeah.
sure that's in here since that's something we
Yeah.
worked with them on.
Yeah.
Trying to describe a little bit more like how, we do plow city streets and that's per, this agreement from the 70s
Yeah.
and then the 2024 amendment that we did. That type of stuff,
Yeah.
so it wasn't anything monumental,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks.
Yep.
Commissioner Sullivan?
I would just like to thank you on behalf of District 4, because many of the calls that I get are about the Gunflint Trail, about clarifying things, and I think this is simple and concise, and that's what we need. And I want to thank you for your work on it.
And expectations, I think, have changed of the highway department, and our service level hasn't changed appreciably. One of the changes that actually has occurred is it used to be a 2-day snow clearing policy, and we weren't doing that. We were doing it in 1 day. And so that's now reflected in this. So if anything, it's actually a better increase of service level compared to what was at least reflected in the last policy.
Right.
It's good to go that direction as opposed to the other.
Right, taking services away.
And I'd like to add, the point of the policy is so when you guys, none of us are here, somebody just comes in and goes, oh, what are we going to do with this? And there's nobody on hand that has actually been doing this for decades. Person coming in won't have a problem
Right.
explaining why we're doing this.
That's our ultimate goal is just a binder where, you know, once we win the lottery, nobody's dying. Once we win the lottery and we're not here anymore, you can just hand off a binder of, here's what the highway department does, and
Yeah.
you can get hopefully most
Exactly
of it.
right.
You know, so.
I'd like more clarity on the weather. It seems like the storms are hitting us on the weekends, and I'm sure you're dreading that when you hear on Friday night that.
Well, that's part of the union negotiations, that they only arrive on weekends.
Well, that was another, we had a brief discussion on it when it comes to plowing and stuff like that, whether our policy informs how we deal with overtime and shifting in that regard. That's going to be in another document because it's not in this document, if it's addressed. So that if it would say, well, here's our policy and we're going to meet our policy, that's intention. But if it comes to saying, oh, we should really, you know, do plowing now and it'd be overtime, that how we have oversight in that regard.
So that, you know, and I think Lisa might have touched on that a little bit, our accountant maybe in personnel, or I remember when you and I had
Yeah.
talked, you know, this had come up before, and I think it's one of those where we budget for it.
Yeah.
You know, so we have a line item in our budget, trying our best to account for some type of overtime, because as you know, like we discussed, you know, every winter is different.
Yeah.
You think back last year,
Yeah.
we didn't have a winter, it was cold,
Yeah.
but there wasn't any snow. You think back 2 years ago, record breaking,
Yeah.
you know, and so this one, probably a little more normal. And so you're trying to figure out, you know, what's an appropriate number. And I think, you know, what we budget for overtime kind of reflects, you know, you look back in history and say like, okay, we're typically always around this. You know, the notion of, well, you know, if I just wait to plow until Saturday, even though it's snowing Friday, just isn't an option, because what happens is we get phone calls and then get angry that nobody went out and plowed. So, you know what I mean? So like that kind of thing, I'm not worried about. I haven't experienced it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Hopefully it won't happen, but I can't imagine. I mean, once it starts snowing, it's gangbusters out to try and get the roads
Yeah.
clear. Because I think, too, our staff knows and we know that, you know, the sooner you do it, the sooner you can go home. And then you don't have to worry about it. So overtime might be great, but so is being at home on a Saturday, or Christmas, or Thanksgiving, or, you know?
It's just another
Yeah.
element of managing service balanced with fiscal responsibility. And the other thing in being aware of that is just saying if it gets to a certain point, you can almost create a position.
Sure.
I mean, that's typically what it is. If we're paying so much in overtime, we might want to
Right.
consider evaluating. But when you have fluctuating,
It's-
it's very difficult to do. It's just be mindful of it and
Yep.
monitor it, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else on snow removal? Okay, then we can go on to road jurisdiction.
Awesome. All right. So this one, there's not really any formal, this is kind of the first time we're really bringing this up to a committee of the whole. If you have the maps in front of you, you can see there's a couple of roads we're talking about adding, a couple we're going to talk about removing, and then kind of some reasonings that we went through. This is stuff, you know, these roads, you know, the grade in particular has been talked about for decades, about whether or not it should or shouldn't be a county road. I think that alone illustrates its importance already to the county. And so there's a myriad of reasons why. So I guess I'll just go over real quick. So what we're talking about is changing the jurisdiction of the grade. So it's 23 miles that connects Ball Club Road over to the Sawmill there. North Pike Lake Road, so it's a small little road, that actually connects two county roads. So it kind of, you'll see it in the notes, kind of creates this county road sandwich. You know, so to me, that's redundancy, and which I think is vital to any transportation system. And then the last one, and that's been brought up a lot too, is Onion River Road. It's just a very busy road, Cook County busy, but still busy. It's actually the busiest road in Superior National Forest. It's the busiest Forest Service road. And so we all know why, Oberg Mountain, you know, all the trail systems that are there. So that's what we're talking about adding. You can see I added, so when we talked about this at Highway Committee, some questions came up about homesteads and addresses and where is everybody. So you can see in the additions map, you know, it's 93 addresses, kind of a lot, 9 homesteads. So then if we look at removals, the reason we talk about removals is, you know, you can, if you're familiar with these roads, they're basically glorified driveways. There's grass growing in the middle of them. They're very narrow. A little bit of history that we did learn at Highway Committee, if you remember, was that I think they're from the fishing days, basically, the fishing glory days on Lake Superior. And so that's why those roads were county roads. You know, nowadays you can see all the traffic counts on them are almost nothing. And so for us, what that benefits us is it's that many less stops you're making. You know, it's not so much the mileage, it's you don't have to go down there now every time it snows. And so I guess at that point, I'd be curious. We've talked about this so much, you know, internally at the highway department with these that I'm out of ideas as to like why or why not or whatever. And so I'm very curious on all of your perspectives on any of this. And maybe we can start with, we start with the additions. We'll just take it one thing at a time here and just see what concerns, comments, whatever. Yeah.
Well, I'm very thrilled to see that the grade is on there.
Mhm.
That is our lifeline if something happens on 61, whether it be a flood, whether it be some kind of tragic crash, and maybe with a tanker truck, and there's some noxious chemicals, and we have to keep the grade open. And so I just think it makes a lot of common sense that we take it over as a county road.
Yes.
Expand on that a little bit. We had a conversation with this at the Transportation and Public Safety Committee in particular about the grade. And maybe Robbie and Matt, you guys could probably speak to it the best, but some of the notes that I made for what was included in that conversation is precedent setting, why this road, why not other roads, how we get there, current levels or a baseline of quality, the ability to maintain a road and where that is compared to other roads that might come up. Current and added costs, what we already do on the grade compared to what we'd be adding in addition to that. And then just kind of high level some of the benefits of us having a little bit more control over that infrastructure. And of course the public safety aspect that we've talked about.
Great points. I forgot. So for what it's worth, that committee meets, it's the first time we've met in about 3 years. So I forgot about that one.
Yeah.
But it was great conversation. Yeah, I think the reliability is kind of the first thing we can talk about, and that's what really spurned it for me was, you know, we all know right now at the Cascade River, there's a hole in the road because they're trying to replace a bridge, and so it'll be like that through October. So to have, you know, kind of that type of lifeline, that type of redundancy for us completely cut off now, and not even an option, I'm genuinely concerned for the next couple of months. Just as the spring melt happens, things back up, things happen, and we're hosed, frankly, if something were to happen. I hope nothing does, but it seems like every year I've been here, there's always that, you know, something is coming up in April or May as things are melting, and we're all looking at the grade in 61 and kind of holding our breath a little bit. So I think that illustrates that. When we were talking about costs, you know, as far as what would this cost us? You know, obviously that's a real thing. We're talking about adding 25.5 miles of road. You know, Matt's already touched on, we're at 1 day plowing everything out. How does this affect us? So we already plow the grade. We do it for free. We actually don't get paid for it. So to me, that's a huge lift for our department, is that winter maintenance aspect. And so the fact that we're already doing it is kind of like check, done. What I did is I pulled, the Forest Service provided some information to us on, traffic counts on the road, so I did my best to try and compare it to other roads in our community, and then did some kind of averaging on costs, and so I would anticipate new costs would be like $20,000 to $30,000 a year for the grade. And so I compared that to, similarly trafficked roads, similar geometry, so long straight roads basically. So I would anticipate something like that. It's basically graveling, that type of stuff, any pothole fixes, random culvert replacements, stuff like that. If you looked, or when we were talking about it before, if you're familiar with the grade, it's, I'll put it in quotes, but it's brand new. All the work that's been done, I think since 2015 or 2019, several large projects on there, all those pipes are new. Road itself has a great base to it already. I think as far as any major work, I just don't see it for us. They gave us a bridge inspection inventory, so there's 4 bridges on there right now. The inspections looked fine. All the bridges were built in the 60s. They rated out just fine. Nothing is load restricted or anything, which is great. Implications as far as like projects, say we do have to replace a bridge, how would we pay for it? And so my advice would be to keep the grade would just be a county road. It wouldn't be township or anything like that, or a UT. The townships go all the way up to the boundary waters. So if we wanted to make it a UT, you could only do like half of it as UT. The other half would have to be county road. I don't see any benefit in doing that though. So if we make it a county road, because we're such a small community, bridge bonds cover 100% of that cost. So covered. I've touched on that before. We'd be on the hook for $10,000 to $20,000. And so I think, bridges and stuff like that would be covered. That would be fine. We had talked about how long it would take to grade the grade. And we figured, I think after talking, it was like 2 10-hour days roughly. And so, yeah, that is work that's not getting done elsewhere. Not denying that. But I think the benefits of us having it, it being impassable for a year wouldn't happen. And so that's done. And just the overall maintenance of it. We can also set the level of service. Do we want to make it minimum maintenance? Maybe we only grade it a couple times. Or do we want an increased level of service on it? It's kind of for us to figure out. So
I also want to just add too that we are uniquely positioned for longer connectors like this versus small residential roads. Like our machines fit much better and do much more important work on long stretches than they do on small residential. A little plug there.
I think that's a really good point. There was one other thing we had talked about. Oh, why these roads?
Yeah.
That was an important. Why these and not other ones? The simplest answer is they're ready. These are already county roads. I can think of probably half a dozen other ones that in all of your districts that could get brought up. Murmur Creek Road, Irish Creek Road, those are the 2 right off the top of my head that get talked about a lot. Those aren't ready. Think about it. When you're on those roads and you see it, can you fit a tandem down that? Can you fit a grader down those? Absolutely not. You look at these roads, they're done. And so and that can get into another conversation too, where we start talking about these additions and even the subtractions. I see the transportation system as layers, right? Highway 61 is what it is. That's MnDOT, big wide road. You have our county roads that bring you into the county. A little smaller, but still have good, widths, and, a lot of them are paved. You can turn off a county road and maybe it's gravel to get you, closer to the boundary waters. And then even there you can go off, now you're probably on a Forest Service road or something like that. Those roads serve the Forest Service, serve the DNR. Versus these, we're talking about serving people. And so I think that conversation with Irish Creek Road and Murmur Creek Road, and I'll pick on those just because they get talked about a lot, isn't dead. It can keep happening, but they need to get built to a point where we can say, yep, now it can become a county road if that's the policy we want to enact. So.
Commissioner Gamble?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot of times when the community comes with petitions, so that a road, becomes our responsibility to maintain, and so I think that was to the Rowan's issue of precedent.
Right.
And so the basis under which we make this decision, when you commented and said, well, they're ready, that's one component of it. So when you're responding to somebody, say, here's the criteria that we measure that informs us, and therefore we make that decision. So as I'm sure you're aware, that the precedent issue is we better be well-positioned to be able to address that relative to the requests that come in. Say, well, if you do this over here, how come you're not doing it over here? And then you have to go to your criteria, just like policy defines. It is basically the structure that protects you and in what informs your decisions.
Right.
So that's an important issue to understand, and when it's well-written, there still would be people that like their road, blah, but we're trying to be good stewards financially and what we can and cannot do. The other component is if you look at the roads that are being recommended to, take over, and those that we would take off that responsibility and doing that financial analysis overall, how does that shake out, just as a matter of information? You said that looking at the additional might be 20 to whatever, on the grade when we're looking
Right.
at things, and addressing the bridge issue is something because of what we are. So all of those things are part of our analysis and making a recommendation. But if you had looked at that, here's our trade-off, which is just one component of analysis, and it's not driven. So when you say these roads that we wouldn't, what are we finding then if we don't have that responsibility relative to how it affects cost? And maybe I'm misunderstanding, but and then you look at, we're gonna take these, how does
Right.
that affect cost?
I think I understand what you're getting at. So I didn't add up costs with these smaller ones.
Yeah.
I looked at them as just, like I said, I think there's more value in just not having to stop there.
Yeah.
And do it. I can probably assume on a lot of these, like I said, if there's grass growing in the middle of them and they're
Yeah.
grown in and they're small, we're probably not doing much there outside of plowing.
Yeah.
Brushing.
Brushing, yeah, so there'd be a brushing component. So I think what we're
Yeah.
dealing with there is time and effort
Yeah.
in that regard versus the cost that I just said, that $20,000 to $30,000
Yeah.
is new cost. Like that would be something we would have to add into our budget.
Yeah.
As opposed to, we're already paying our staff. It just depends where they go,
Yeah.
so.
It's sort of like the idea of working within the staffing levels and the equipment levels we have now.
Yeah.
If you take on more,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you take on more and you don't get rid of anything, then you could probably expect your service level to go down.
Yeah, now you just identified the framework in which budgeting should take place.
Right.
Right. So, and some of this does also go to the things we've talked about in regards to like adding a maintenance staff. And so that's something we had in our budget this last year that got approved, which was great. And it's a long process. If we wanted to add a person and a truck, it's $400,000 minimum.
Yeah.
And obviously now costs keep going up. So that's probably changed. And so the idea we had was if we can figure out and say, hey, let's phase that idea in over 5 or 7 years and just kind of add $20,000 every year. 7 years from now, we can say, all right, we have a chunk of change. Are we in a position where we should add staff? Or is that appropriate to do to help maintain this level of service? And if not, well, now we have this chunk of change.
Yeah.
Go do a project or something like that. But it's an opportunity to genuinely address that issue that comes up. Because as we say about, so now the other thing is if we're taking over roads we've never done work on, that's different. We do work on the grade. We do work on North Pike Lake Road. We do a little bit of work on Onion River Road. So the lift for us isn't a lot. But now when we start talking into the future a bit about your Murmur Creeks and your Irish Creek roads, that's brand new stuff. Valley Creek Road, that's another one that comes up. That's brand new. And so to Matt's point about, we have limited staff, limited resources, now that level of service just drops because we have the same stuff and we're trying to do more with it. So I think it all kind of comes together, but that's why we wanted to start here because these ones to us were more of the low-hanging fruit.
So on the map here, North
Yes.
Pike Lake Road, so from Babineau Corner, you go to the Y and then turn
Right.
and go to the end of that. So
Exactly. So that's a
okay.
tiny little connector. It's a kind of a goofy one.
Yeah.
Honestly, the Forest Service kind of forgot it was their road. But we plow it and grade it and gravel it. We do all the work on it in order to get to our county road that's on the other side of the lake there. And so it just seemed, that's why I wrote the analogy, if it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, deduct. Like that one to me hits the nail on the head. But I think the point too about why these is they're ready. They are. These are essentially county roads, just not by name, basically, you know. Is there any more, we can move on to subtractions, or we can just keep generally talking about this? Doesn't matter.
What put it on the radar?
What's that?
What, this?
This? Honestly, the grade being out, I find it completely unacceptable.
Okay.
As somebody who thinks about our transportation system
Yeah.
too much. And so the fact that that's gone, and the fact that we, like I said, we've talked about this for so long, it's kind of like, we either need to do it, or I'm tired of talking about it and we're done. Like, then it's just done. We're not gonna talk about it again, but there's easily minutes from the early 2000s, and I'm sure well before that, that talks about this.
And it would just, yeah, to add to that, that's the public safety component of the Public Safety Transportation Committee, who hasn't met for so long, felt the need to meet, and it was that. It was,
Yeah.
you know, there's a
Okay.
glaring
Yeah.
concern here that we should talk about what's the best way to address that.
And I didn't know, I'll put Neva on the spot for a second. You know, some of the other things that got brought up in Highway Committee was kind of the land use plan and, what was it, the no service zones among just, you know, impacts. How would this impact kind of zoning or anything like that? And I don't know if you had any thoughts off the top of your head, or thoughts? We have thoughts, good.
Always have thoughts.
Always have thoughts, yes, please.
Hi, guys. How's it going? Great discussion. So our land use guide plan agrees much with what Robbie has said. It identifies the importance of road and that infrastructure for accessing private property. It recognizes that our county road system is a spine with Highway 61, with the ribs of the county roads going inland, but that there's these big gaps in connecting those county roads to each other. So this could help connect that Caribou Trail over to using the grade. So it's a long-winded way of saying that this is kind of recognizing the county land use guide plan as a gap. The county land use guide plan kind of says that we have one of the most unique road infrastructures in Minnesota, with that relationship with the public-private and having that, yeah, quirky Cook County. So I think that this is really aligned with gaining more of that access with that plan. So, yeah.
Thanks.
There's setback differences between county roads and these like non-county roads, but we process that through how we process all things as rules change over time. So I don't anticipate with the lot sizes in this area that's going to generate a lot of difficulties. If anything, we may see some variances for road setbacks on what might become non-conforming structures that are really close to the grade. When I looked at the Pike Lake Road, there was maybe one property that had some residential development next to the road itself that could create kind of a grandfathered-in situation. But frankly, we've got a really well-established process to go through that, and the changes in this would be a very valid practical difficulty for reasonable expansions. So,
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. You're welcome. Commissioner Gamble?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I appreciate the interdepartmental
Oh, yeah.
analysis, you know? That's just, it's great to see, and also, given the meeting and the discussion, the response to it, so those are all very encouraging, so, thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Yeah. So we kind of talked about some additions here, removals, subtractions. You know, I kind of touched on it already. You know, these are glorified driveways. I think one that would warrant more discussion, and I have it highlighted, as Skyport Lane. So Skyport Lane is not a county road, but we do everything on it. Everything. And so we just, one way or another, either we're gonna stop doing stuff on it, or we should make it a county road. That's my 2 cents. But just to try and, you know, I understand, you know, sometimes we have to operate in a gray area and whatever, but there's, you know, in certain circumstances, we don't need to. And so to me, this is another one where, you know, we're already doing the work on it, so we should either make it a county road, or not. And I don't know, I know on the airport commission, that's come up quite a bit, right? I don't know if you want to touch on anything. You and I have talked about it a little bit here and there.
So Skyport Lane happens to be on the south side of the old airport runway. And part of that land is controlled by the FAA. And it would right now we have a lot of property owners that are involved with that road. It seems that it would be simple and make a lot of common sense if the county managed that road. It would be one entity to work with the FAA. We are looking at lots that are on there. If you look at a county map, you'll see that Skyport Lane weaves in and out of the airport property and then onto private property. And maybe our county attorney has some perspective on that, because it is something we've discussed over the years.
I guess I don't have feedback other than that if that has been maintained by the county in the past, you know, there may be some arguments, at least by the property owners, that there's some expectation that that continues, that you know, you're stopped somehow from discontinuing that without the of course, without the appropriate notice periods and everything else, but
Right.
It doesn't sound like it would be very different from what's going on already.
Right.
Right, and you know, getting rid of service, all that means is there's still options out there. As you're all familiar, we have subordinate service districts, and so Skyport actually might be an interesting candidate for that, given all the people that live there. You know, some of these might make sense for that, some might not. Obviously, there's a lot of private plowing that happens up here as well, so it's not that people wouldn't have the option. You know, the roads would still get plowed, it just wouldn't be by us.
Clarification on the Hanson Hempstead Road?
Yes.
That's the one by Hanson Hardware?
Yes, I
Yeah, go
believe
back.
that's, yeah, like right next to it, that goes up.
Go up. And you
Right.
do that already anyway?
We do that already, yes. Yeah, so all of these ones that we're talking about removals are currently county roads. All of these we maintain, like we had talked about, the brushing, the plowing, that type of stuff. What we're proposing is just because of what they are, who they serve, their condition, you know, stuff like that. That's why we're proposing removing them.
Removing them.
Right.
You know what's happening in the West End? Hanson Hardware has ceased doing any snow plowing.
Oh,
So
okay.
there are people who are really scrambling.
Mhm.
Now, this road, if it becomes non-county,
Right.
you know, plowed, I'm just wondering there's not a lot of people there,
Right.
but just given the fact that snow plowers are not by the dozen anymore,
Right.
I'm just thinking about winter for that.
Totally fair, and that's why we leave this,
Yeah.
the decision-making is obviously yours. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So, from the public standpoint, and I just applauded the interdepartmental, but the stakeholders involved, what kind of information do we have that's coming from the public as to the proposal? And it's nothing that's required or mandated by law that there needs to be a public hearing before action is taken?
I don't think so. I know it's pretty darn clear, whatever Minnesota statute it is about the county basically taking over, revoking, or abandoning roads, whatever
Yeah.
the phrasing is. If there is a public hearing that needs to happen, obviously we can do that. This is by no means happening fast. This is the first time we're bringing this
Right.
up in a public
Right.
setting.
Right.
You know, so right now, I think the goal I wanted was just feedback to see if there was any, you know, like, depending the feedback, I would then reach back out to the Forest Service, for example, when we're talking about
Right.
the grade and Onion River and North Pike Lake Road, and say, you know, yep, there seems to be a lot of favorability for this, so what's the process? What are next steps? Or, hey, we still have some questions, you know, I just wanted to hear from you guys on
Yeah.
what your
Yeah.
thoughts were.
I think
So,
Commissioner Storley's comment is an informative because
Right.
it gives context. And so then the question relative to those people that are affected, so it's just saying,
It
have
could-
we involved them yet in that process?
No.
Just so we as decision makers.
Yeah, no, like, we haven't sent out any mailers or anything
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that, for example. I think depending the outcome of this
Yeah.
discussion, and I think the removals maybe is something a little bit different, but, you know, I could say if we are all in agreement about removing the roads,
Yeah.
that, you know, it would be something where maybe we put together a mailer and send it out to every address on those roads and just say, you know, hi, so-and-so, you know, per the county board, meeting, blah, 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 effective this date.
Yeah.
This road is no longer a county road, so services for graveling, grading, snow plowing, culvert steaming, name another thing, are no longer provided for you by the county. And we can also list, here's some, respective contacts that might be,
Right.
G&G does steaming. Here's some East End people we know that plow, for example. Here's some West End people we know that plow. I don't know if we want to do that. That could be favorites to contractors, but, you're just trying to here's
Yeah.
options.
Yeah.
On what you can do, so.
Another clarification,
Yes.
Ski Hill Road.
Yes, not the whole thing. So I knew that would come up.
You're
So,
gonna turn around halfway up?
yeah. So if you're Ski Hill Road up to Papa Charlie's, is County State Aid Highway number 5.
Yeah.
That is ours.
Yeah.
What I'm proposing is where the pavement stops. Beyond that, it's super goofy.
Okay.
Beyond that is technically County Road 36, which is still called Ski Hill Road. It actually goes over the Poplar River and winds back really far, even though the parking lot's like 500 more feet or something like that. So that's the chunk we're talking about there.
Okay.
And so is that windy part back there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Dyer's Lake, that's in Schroeder Township, and they do
Yes.
have some roads they take care of, so.
Right, and so some of this too is another conversation, it doesn't come up too much here, but, roads that are in townships, and we'd have to look at how the process works, but I believe if a county abandons a road, it goes to the next government agency, and so then that would be the township. Townships do get money from the state as pass-through dollars from us for every mile or for every piece of road that they declare. So Schroeder and Tofty, for example, are the only ones that actually declare township miles. And so we pass through money from the state to them. It's a similar process where we put up the UT signs. We are a part of that bank too, except the UT ones aren't in a township, so the county gets that money. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So those do have some notice requirements.
That would be something, but we'd have to dig into that a little bit to see, but it would be, I believe how it works is if we abandon a road in a township, I don't know, I think it might be automatic that it goes to the township. The township still has the option then to be like, nope, we don't want it. And so then it would, go back then to nothing, but I'd have to
It
look at
does,
that.
but they get notice
They do,
on
okay,
that. And
okay,
so, yeah.
good to know, yeah.
So it seems like as we're all talking that the additions don't seem to be an issue, that we still have some questions and information we need about maybe removing.
So do you think, so it seems like addition-wise, seems pretty comfortable if I reached out to the Forest Service to say, there seems to be general consensus that all this sounds good. What is the process for actually changing the jurisdiction? That seems okay-ish, yeah.
I am curious about that.
And I'm curious, yeah,
Yeah.
because I know they've had a lot of issues lately, but when I've talked about this over the years with various people there, it seems like it's a pretty easy, like a pretty quick thing, or pretty easy process. I don't think it would take years to do.
I think desirable on their end.
Super desirable on
Yeah,
their
we're
end,
taking
yeah.
the grade now.
So, and I'm not getting paid by them. I don't get any kickbacks for us taking the grade.
Really?
I promise I don't. Matt does. But if we,
Very unlikely.
okay, so that seems pretty straightforward. Removal-wise, would it make sense? Obviously, if we're gonna go talk to people and be like, hi, do you want no service on your road?
Yeah. Yeah, what do you
Well-
expect, yeah. Yeah.
But so what is a good framework to try and get
Well, I
some
think we have
input?
two different groups here,
We do.
because we have places that are county roads, and then we have Skyport Lane, which isn't, although we have plowed it.
Right.
So I think communication with those groups is different.
And, yeah, I would argue case by case, they're all a little different. And just
Right.
looking at the traffic counts, especially on the east end of things, this could create some real hardships for people, especially knowing our current plow
Yeah.
shortage.
Mhm.
I have some real concerns, and I understand the reasoning, and I'm
Sure.
not against it, but I think there's a lot more research that needs to be done on the impacts and potential solutions. I mean, I know you love subordinate service districts.
We do.
And so, that could be an option, but or special assess. I don't know all the different options, so I think there's a lot we need to look at. But I really appreciate if there's going to be an addition, then there should be maybe subtractions here. So I think it's a real good start. Just there's a lot more I think that needs to happen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, you got to start somewhere, and it's in response to meeting and discussing, and your response, which is good. So when you say stakeholders, the evaluation process, we pretty much know if somebody's been getting something and you're going to take it away. We don't really need to ask. We can anticipate.
Right.
It's all sort of predicated on the degree of empathy and identifying all of the stakeholders and what we can and cannot do. And you come to us and you say, we did an evaluation here and we're looking at what we have as staff. This is what we can do. It's the same, like I say, it's a good model for budgeting. We only have so much, so what can we do? And so you're hoping that empathy, respect for processes, and letting everybody contribute and inform us, but we still have to make some hard decisions. And so in making hard decisions, we just want to be sure that you're evident and your voice is evident in that process. That's hugely important. But we can't ignore the realities that you brought before us relative to when we look at what we have available in equipment and staffing. This is what we think we can do, and this is how we can do it. So that isn't important, obviously. And so as being entrusted that with that responsibility on behalf of the county, that's huge to us as decision makers to take the information you're bringing to us and to weigh that. So all of these stakeholders, we want to hear from that collective voice, but we certainly wouldn't ignore what you're telling us. So it's like you go back and say, it's like, we got to do it all with what? Yeah, so anyway.
Yep, go ahead.
And I would also say that one piece of information for me that would be helpful, and I can certainly look it up myself, but along the removals, we have a small number of homesteads. Where are those homesteads, on which roads? So we can look at clusters of community, density of population as a factor for whether we plow or not. If we have one person on a road that's a 1/10 of a mile, to me, that's a driveway. And somebody should be plowing their driveway.
Yeah.
But if we have a large number of people that are living along one of those roads, then maybe that's something to consider. But just having that knowledge would help me, and also help me to think about, is it more appropriate for a subordinate service district, having had those conversations in the past.
And I can look back, I didn't break it down by road, but you can look at the number we have on here and say, there's 14 homesteads, 43 addresses, so each of these had a couple. If you want to spread it out. Skyport, I think, had the most. Anderson Road didn't have any registered addresses on it. We know it serves one person, but similar, like that's a driveway. I think Hanson Hempstead might have been the next most, dense or populated one.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and so, that's where, Ski Hill Road, the end that I'm talking about, there's none there.
Nobody.
So, but what I can do, and that was kind of be my follow-up question with the removal side of things, was I can break it down by road. That's easy enough to do. What else? Because I've heard a lot of talk about more research and more what, but like what? I need to know what. What is going to inform, help that, or is it just a non-starter and we don't want to take services away, which is also fine,
Again, this goes to information to the residents and say, here's this, and we can pay another $25 or $50 or whatever on, the levy will increase more because we have to buy, a road grader and things like that. Or here are the other options, and it's not that we don't love you or value you, but there's a cost. But we will definitely help you set up a subordinate service area, and we'll try to walk you through it. And I think the reality is, because of the older snow plowers being done with it, if there's enough road to plow and enough snow in the winter, somebody will take a chance and invest. I mean, those plows are, I think we paid $7,000 or $8,000 for our last plow on top of the truck, on top of everything else, and then the liability insurance. But if you get enough plow routes, enough people, enough roads, it's worth the investment. It's really worth the investment. And we've got a couple of younger plowers that have actually invested in sanding, too. So, but the point is, I don't feel that being cast off by the county on my own road, that the entire population should not have to plow my driveway if it's 2 miles long or 3 miles long, if I'm the only person on it. And so that's what makes us tough-headed. If you want to live here, this is what you take care of.
I would like time to spend with our county attorney to just talk about Skyport Lane in particular and airport issues. That's very different than any of the other roads, so I think putting this off for a little bit and getting more information would be really helpful.
Because it's a beginning, that we understand we're going through a process and they just want to know, so what would you like to know? And I think in the evaluation, when you have things like an airport and the effects of that, but one thing I think we should address that was looked at is that, let's just say that we had a provider or a significant, resource in the county that's affected by that road, we wouldn't want to be taking something, access to that provider or that significant, whatever. So that's one of the things, so that when we're addressing the public, we're saying, we looked at this, we looked at this, we looked at that, and based upon that criteria, this is what we came up with. So.
Thank you. So as far as research and information, I would, if you can break it down for cost, that would be very helpful per road, and these are really short sections often, so maybe that's not going to be a huge factor, but it could be time, it could be materials, whatever. Road condition might be something just to factor in. Potential resources for people, whether they're plowing or subordinate service districts, just what potential is out there. I think there's space here for EDA business grant to get another plow person. Like, there's some opportunities here too, and I really appreciate that idea of the investment being worth it if there's enough there. So just trying to line all that up. And then just population and density, and not to be forgotten, history, as much as we can learn about why these were county roads. Some are just, like you said, way back in the day, fishing access or whatever. But I don't know anything about any of these roads. So it's just, I feel clueless as far as making a decision at this point. And yes, it's the beginning, and I appreciate that. But those are the types of things that I would want to consider, and just those, impacts. And that, I think that communication is key, sooner probably rather than later. And yeah, absolutely, everyone's going to say no. But if we can kind of frame everything out with, these are the costs, this is the reality, this is the practicality, this is the potential, hopefully we can have a reasonable conversation.
And it could be, I could see something where even if a hearing or a town hall or whatever isn't required, we could still do it.
Sure.
Yeah. We could still invite everybody in and say, we know what this means, here's what we put together, and we can at least have the opportunity to say why, take the darts, and either keep our decision on removing, or say, you know what, actually, we don't think it's a good idea anymore, we're gonna, we'll keep all of these. Or it's a smattering, maybe we keep some, get rid of other ones, something like that. I think I would push hard to get rid of County Road 36, the end of Ski Hill Road. No, really. To me, that's an easy one, like super easy. There's no one, it's way longer than we even remotely maintain. So that's probably the only one I would ever be like.
It's parking for the ski hill.
Exactly.
That's all it is.
That's it.
Yeah, the other factor too is just, what is our comprehensive land use plan, guide plan looking at, and where do we expect more homes to go, and where do we want more homes to go,
Right.
and what could make more sense in the future too, and maybe that's a harder thing to answer, but that's another factor of just, because in our SGSD conversations, we're often saying we're the only county in the state that have the SGSDs, and does it make sense for all of those to be county roads? So it's kind of like this swing from one way to the other, and so I just think we need to dig in a little bit, or not dig necessarily, but dive in a little bit more.
So do you have your assignment now?
Yeah, no, that helped a lot. I think, there's
Yeah.
there's a lot of the information I just didn't bring today, but I can find we have all of this information. Some of the stuff with population and density, obviously we can reach out to Tim and Neva for that and the land use plan. I know we've all talked enough about land use. We know where it is. We know it's, kind of that Irish Creek Road, that Tom Lake area. Right now, that's all DNR roads, but every time we talk to the DNR, they say, hey, when are you going to take it over? And so, that's where that goes. We know, we have an idea of where people are going a little bit, so, but no, this helped a lot, yes.
So you could come back in a few weeks?
Sure.
Okay.
Could I make one?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I would say to the extent we can eliminate assumptions, because our assumptions might be rightly held, but if we have the individuals that are the stakeholders participating, to the extent we eliminate those assumptions,
Sure.
that shows respect, even like you say, if we're not required to have a public hearing, but we choose to do that, that's because we recognize you're a stakeholder. The other question I would, my first term, the Forest Service was abandoning a lot of roads, and that was all because they did an assessment of cost to maintain. And so it is a reality, and we're not the only ones that are faced with that reality. So that point. The other thing is, I'm not sure what the partnership arrangement and agreement is like in law enforcement with the city as with the roads and maintenance with the city, and how that's just another element of it. That
Sure, and that's something we talked about a bit, maybe a year ago or so. And so at the time, nobody kept track. We have to keep track statutorily of what roads we're on, when, how much money we're spending, that type of stuff. And after we had that meeting, the city doesn't really have the capability to do that.
Yeah.
And so we tried about a year ago to say, all right, let's do our best to keep track of it for a year. We're actually due for a check-in because it's been about a year, to see what those costs are. It's pretty, I'll say, with that relationship, the current setup is uncommon that we have with Grand Marais compared to other counties and other cities. Most counties and cities either kind of square up every single year or settle up every year as far as services. Or there's other avenues where a county can just say, nope, we're not doing city roads, and the city does their own stuff. So there's different arrangements. Ours is pretty unique. And so instead of just saying, we're not going to do city streets anymore, we decided in that meeting to let's keep track of things for a year and kind of see where we're at. We'll let the next administrator deal with that. But but yeah, so that's kind of where that sits right now. And so yeah, we talk a lot. I know Lenny comes in, Matt and Lenny talk quite a bit with services. Salt Sand's another one. We have a sheet now in our shed that I believe they check out or sign every time they come in. So that helps a lot.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
This
Thank
is
you.
probably the impetus for Hoagland to incorporate.
Yes, 100%.
Care to say anything?
Yeah. No comment.
Careful.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Is that your water cup, or is that yours?
That's mine.
Yeah.
Okay, next on the agenda, we're going to have Bob Thompson come forward to talk about the Scheef Parcel Sawtooth Bluff Master Plan. And this is like printing out half a Bible.
Yeah, it is
Thank you, Bob.
a lot of work.
Well, I had 3 people from Land Services here, and none of them are stepping up. I don't
Here
know.
comes one.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So, and the commissioners, so we have another discussion here for Scheef. I know we had a conversation last month at Committee of Whole, and we kind of wanted just some more information on the various options, the conservation easement, we didn't have a copy of that, and just kind of doing a little bit more background work to bring to the conversation. So, did Dave, or not Dave, who stepped out? Deb.
No, Commissioner.
Deb stepped out. So the first attachment I have here in the long list of attachments are just laying out those options that we kind of discussed at the last meeting. And obviously there's the conservation easement discussion that was going on in 2022. We talked about potentially looking into a land exchange or a purchase of the Scheef property. Currently, John Scheef and his attorney are asking us to give a preferred access easement. That's where it sits right now. They've asked us to, consider bringing to the board a preferred access route into the Scheef property, which they say would be less disruptive to the Sawtooth Bluff master plan that exists. And that's why Land Services here is to kind of talk to the Sawtooth Bluff master plan and their survey results that they had kind of put together over the last month. And, some things have come up with the preferred easement. So the way that it's kind of being presented to us, and, I'm not sure what the best way to convey this is, but we're kind of being asked to, bring this to the board so that they can get a preferred route. And if we don't grant that preferred route, then the road would be built across that Munson and Otto plat, or Munson and Pierce plat, which is from 1903. It's right in the middle of the Sawtooth Bluffs, kind of on the top of the hillside. And, it allows for 66-foot wide roads that follow a set of alleys and avenues and streets. So one of the things that, I had kind of thought of since our last meeting was they do have the access right. They as of right now, the judge's ruling is that there are public dedicated roads that could be developed to offer access to Scheef's property. Those do not include utility easements. So Scheef could potentially build a road right now, according to the judge's ruling, but I don't know where he would get his electricity from into the property, because there is no access, there is no easement for electricity. They didn't include that in the 1903 plat. So that's something that's new information that we've kind of, just kind of considered over the last few weeks here. And I know we reached out to Arrowhead Electric, and, the first thing they do when you say, yeah, I need electricity into my property, is they say, well, where is this going to go? Where's the easement for this? Kind of that ties into this conversation with the electrical. In Scheef's appraisal, there is an estimate provided for bringing electricity into the property. They estimated that at 1,700 feet. And the only way you can get a 1,700-foot measurement into the Scheef property is going directly from the south and the private property, which would cross federal land. So I'm not sure, maybe they have other conversations going on with electricity easements, but we're not aware of that at this point. And I would imagine if they can get an electricity easement, they can probably get an access easement that would be shorter than going across Sawtooth Bluffs as well. But, that's still kind of an unknown, right now, the way we see it is that Scheef does not have an easement to put electricity across the Sawtooth Bluff property. So that also kind of, I think, changes the perspective of, if an investor was looking at buying this property to develop, which is what we're kind of told that is ultimately what would happen if the county wasn't to act on one of these other options, that they would pursue developing a road and selling the property and subdividing it up into 8 different parcels. They've actually already provided us with the documents that would subdivide that parcel. They just haven't, as far as I know, recorded them yet. So I'm not sure, where we want to start with this, and I'll guess I'll kind of ask the chair. Do we want to kind of go through option A, B, C, or in the interest of, Land Services times, do you want to hear about the Sawtooth Bluff survey first and kind of see how that came out?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't not completely prepared to go kind of fully in depth to the survey, but I did a pretty good job of putting it all together. I have it here available, but it might not be able to see it on my computer. I did intend to kind of get in front of you all at some point. I don't know which capacity we want to do that, whether that's at a board meeting or at another one of these. But so that's out there. So yeah, as kind of Bob talked about, so we've got kind of the plat going through the old streets and avenues. It does, very much bisect the proposed plan for Sawtooth Bluffs, and I'm again, can get this all to you. You know, so it wouldn't be favorable to kind of create an obstruction if we ever did want to develop in the layout that was proposed back in 2018. So, I mean, again, we can go from the top. So we asked a lot of questions, you know, I think it was 14 questions. We kind of started with, you know, were you aware of this kind of proposed park plan before the survey? Pretty good portion of people were aware of it, especially if you're from Cook County. You know, over half of the people that were full-time Cook County residents did know about it. Substantially less if you were outside of the county. You know, kind of one of the major questions I asked was, you know, how likely are you to visit this park if it's developed? About 60% of Cook County residents said that they were likely or very likely to utilize the park. That just went up pretty substantially if you went further away from Cook County, so either part-time residents. Oh, yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, really, Dave.
Sure.
I was talking with Jana about being able to get that.
Yeah. Up on the screen.
Up on the
Sure.
screen. She's got a flash drive that what she's doing, when she
Okay,
comes
she's gonna
back
get
in,
it. Okay, perfect.
She's gonna get a flash drive and get your file from you
Perfect.
and be able to put that up on the screen.
Thank you.
Good, thanks.
Yep.
So people are in favor of coming to the park?
Yes.
Good,
You know, and then, you know, kind of some of the other questions I asked was like, okay, so that was coming to the park. My bearings here. Third question is, how important do you think it is to develop a regional park in Cook County? Again, I have some graphs here to illustrate, so that's going to be much more useful. You know, about 140 people from Cook County, you know, full-time residents, felt that it was kind of a low, or excuse me, I think I have the wrong graph. Again, I was kind of in a hurry. Sorry, I have two very similar questions with very similar data, and I was just putting this together this morning. So essentially, you know, how important do you believe it is to develop a park in Cook County? Yeah, is nearby. Do you have that? Perfect.
Maybe while they're doing that, I'd just take the opportunity to just zoom out a little bit and frame it up. I think, you know, Bob alluded to it. John's originally, going back for quite some time, was looking at doing a conservation easement, and kind of his stated preference to us when we first started having these conversations with him was that the property not be developed. And there was different reasons as to that. The view shed, the proximity to this potential park is why we're getting a little bit more detailed information as we have it on that. That I'm not overly familiar with that process, but it seemed like the land trust kind of backed away and wasn't interested in that. And so then what's the best way to get that outcome? And so in conversations of starting over and moving forward with him, his thought was approaching the county and having the county, you know, buy the property or control the property in one way or the other to have that decision-making process over it. Felt like the right thing to do, the right next step, the right next ask. And we moved down that, and what really changed was this plat, and we talked about that last time, that shows access and changes some considerations and factors there. And Bob made reference to, you know, kind of the question or our inability to find utility easement, which again factors into that. But really where we're sitting at following a meeting with John and his representation is, when we look at it and we follow the assessor's process for assessing the value of the property, and when they do their appraisal of the property, there's some differences. And I think at some point, you know, having them come in and give the board information from their perspective would be appropriate. But, you know, at this time, we're answering the questions that Bob was asked to come up with, going back to that. So it's within that larger context that, you know, they have an idea of the value of the property that they'd like to see to give it up, to sell it. And we have an assessed value of it, and there's some difference there. And so then when you look at all the options Bob's laid out, and then when we consider the proximity to the park and the details and the public's feeling about that park, I think it's within that we hope to give you enough information to help inform a kind of a next step decision. Here's what we think is going to happen with this property in terms of the park. Here's issues we see with access, and here's a whole list of options that the board might consider or might ask for more information on about how to address this and move forward.
Madam Chair, just quickly, because you're going to be presenting the findings, when was that survey done?
We did that over pretty much most of February.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, again, I wasn't really expecting that we were going to go full on into like all of the survey results, but
Ready, go.
it is pretty. Like I said, I threw this all together this morning, so forgive any sort of errors that you may see. Thank you.
I'm impressed already, Mitch.
Good, good. So as you can see, Sawtooth Bluffs area kind of overlaid on our aerial imagery map. That's kind of all the area that is being considered, along with, this is the Scheef parcel here that was considered for acquisition back during that kind of initial inception. So back in November, I looked at this route with Mr. Scheef along with a couple of his consultants, surveyors. So we kind of looked at this pink route to look at access over the old plat. I was looking at it from the perspective of, you know, Wetland Conservation Act, the Wetland Conservation Act, which I also administer for the county, and just seeing if it was a viable route from that regard. It would be feasible, you know, just from a wetlands perspective. However, from a stormwater perspective, it's a very long road. So you'd likely have to do some engineering in terms of a stormwater plan to, you know, make sure that it's going to be a stable road in that alignment. So as you can see, Sawtooth Bluffs here. So this is Old Ski Hill Road. You can kind of see, you know, if you kind of back up. So this is, again, the kind of the tower at the end of Old Ski Hill Road. You'd kind of be going from here all the way across the mountain biking and hiking trails area to get to Mr. Scheef's parcel here. You know, certainly creating an obstacle. You know, it wouldn't kind of put it out of the realm of possibility, but, you know, it's definitely an obstacle to work around. So again, I mean, you know, currently where we stand in the process of developing, you know, Sawtooth Bluffs is we need to get engaged with the joint powers agreement with the city. You know, I'm kind of also currently sitting on the Parks and Trails Legacy Advisory Commission, which is kind of a advisory commission for the state and specific to parks and trails and how they spend legacy dollars there. So, I mean, if you ever want to take a look at this, we can get more into the overall process. So, you know, obviously in February we asked these 14 questions. You know, the first 9 were about park development, the last 5 were kind of pertaining to demographics. So again, you know, before this survey, were you aware of the proposed Sawtooth Bluffs Regional Park Plan? And I broke this up based on, you know, essentially residency. So, you know, you can see full-time residents at the top, part-time residents, and then frequent visitors and occasional visitors. So you can see kind of full-time Cook County residents were pretty well aware of the plan, you know, and substantially less as you went down the line. So how likely are you to visit or use a regional park if it's developed? So you can see Cook County residents again here at the top. So green and blue are very likely or likely. You can see that almost, you know, 55–56% of people were likely to use it from Cook County, and then, yeah, obviously substantially higher the further away from Cook County you got. So we kind of had a sliding scale question here for this one, is how important do you think it is to develop a regional park in Cook County? You know, 1 or 0 being, you know, it's not important at all, 10 being it's very important. So I kind of broke it up a couple different ways. You can kind of see, you know, pretty substantial number of folks felt that it was a 0 or 1 in terms of importance. But I kind of also broke it up from 0 to 3 is low importance, medium importance is 4 to 6, and then high importance was 7 or above. You can kind of see that, you know, part-time Cook County residents and frequent visitors obviously are more in favor of a park, but I mean, you're likely still looking at taxpayers here and here as well. So I mean, it's pretty evenly distributed, you know. Could probably argue it either way. What amenities or features would you like to see in the regional park? We kind of focused on, you know, so all kinds of things. We said none of the above. About 30% of Cook County residents felt like they didn't want any of the above, you know, so leave it alone. You know, and then we have walking, hiking trails, mountain bike trails, ski trails, disc golf, picnic areas, playgrounds, community spaces, and then other. And of the other responses, kind of the more common ones, were having motorsports or ATVs or snowmobile access. You know, some people wanted it to stay green or low or no impact to the area whatsoever. A lot of people wanted to focus on housing. Good contingent of folks wanted some winter sports. There was a kind of some vocal alpine backcountry glade skiers out there. Mountain climbing, there was a few. Kind of a focus on beginner mountain biking or biking areas, and then picnic areas were kind of some common ones they wanted to see outside of the ones that I provided. How much do you believe the development of a regional park would benefit the community? Again, pretty similar distribution to that importance question, with kind of the notable trend being, you know, people from outside of the county or part-time residents were more in favor of seeing it. Any questions? I know I'm kind of rattling off a bunch of stuff here. Okay. Do you have any concerns about the regional park plan? You know, and check all that apply. So, you know, kind of the more common ones I put were, you know, environment, traffic or congestion, safety, maintenance, and then I provided another column for people to write in what they wanted. Kind of the, you know, from the other responses, you know, a lot of people said that there was no concern. I didn't provide that option. You know, that's hindsight being 20/20. I should have. A good number of people wanted to leave the hillside alone. A lot of people felt we have enough recreation opportunities in Cook County. That the park would be just for tourists. A lot of people were concerned about safety on the Gunflint Trail or Old Ski Hill Road. A significant number of people were concerned about cost to taxpayers. You know, stormwater concerns, air quality, you know, things coming downhill from, you know, a lot of development going on, or, you know, smoke from campfires and whatnot if we were to develop a campground. A lot of people wanted to focus on housing. People were concerned about lack of staffing and maintenance as well. So, I mean, just to kind of speak to those to some degree, you know, I mean, the county owns a good portion of this land. You know, obviously, to me, leaving it alone doesn't really seem like a good use of our land. You know, I mean, low impact I do see, but, you know, leaving it there and not utilizing it or selling it kind of seems counterintuitive to how we should be managing our land. Yes, we have a lot of recreational opportunities. However, Cook County is not really engaged in the game whatsoever. We're not generating revenue off it in any way, shape, or form. So there's an opportunity there for the county to generate some revenue. I would disagree that it's just for tourists. I mean, you can see in the survey that a lot of folks said that they would utilize it. You know, safety, I think, you know, just for informing folks, I think a lot of people were of the mindset that you would be accessing the park from where the water tower is on that runaway truck ramp. That wouldn't be the case. We'd be kind of accessing from below the dog park, creating access there. And then as far as Old Ski Hill Road, yeah, I mean, we got some concerned citizens about, you know, increasing traffic on Old Ski Hill Road, which is a fairly, you know, dead-end backcountry road, and, you know, what the implications with that would be, I'm not sure. As far as cost to taxpayers, I mean, you know, yes, we do have a small contribution, you know, to get the park up and running. However, the goal of all of what I'm doing is currently to kind of get that regional park designation through the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission, which would essentially mean that, it would open us up to legacy dollars, and, it would be a state-funded project, not on the burden of the taxpayers. Additionally, generating its own revenue so that we could pay staff to keep it maintained. As far as air and water quality, I do a lot of development in Cook County, and that's kind of what I came here from, was that background of regulatory oversights. And, as far as water quality concerns go, I don't have any major ones there. I think we could do it in a way that was fairly green, low impact. Especially if it's just trails. You guys are aware of what the pincushion system looks like from town. Probably be pretty similar. And additionally, if we were to sell it, or, then we have no oversight on what happens there, so. And we are working on housing. You guys are seeing it happening. It doesn't happen fast, but it's happening. And then again, a lack of staffing, it's an opportunity to create some jobs for people in Cook County, in my opinion. Are you supportive of allocating local resources, such as taxes or public funds, to develop the park? Pretty good portion of Cook County full-time residents said no. 48% versus 38% said yes. And then, as you can see, the further away you get from Cook County, or part-time residents were more in favor of spending tax dollars to do this. However, again, I won't be spending tax dollars to develop the parks. Just wanted to see if folks were interested in kind of engaging in the process more, being involved in the planning. And not a substantial amount of people said yes. I was expecting more. Again, just feel free to holler if you have any questions. And question 9 was kind of just a general comment, provide any comments that you would like that you have about the park. Again, kind of mixed reactions. A lot of people felt there was recreational opportunities already available. People were concerned about accessibility and safety. Good portion of people felt there was a good economic benefit to the county. But there are concerns about traffic, environmental impact, maintenance. I think we should be. We're all aware of what we're trying to maintain in Cook County here already. And people were also kind of concerned about either user conflicts or conflicts with neighbors, noise, things like that. A lot of people suggested we focus on existing infrastructure, housing needs, or alternative uses. Any questions about this? Again, I don't really feel like it's an option to leave it alone. I think we either do something with it or sell it. It's no benefit to us just sitting there, so. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, Madam Chair. Thank you for the information.
Yeah.
So just stepping way back, and I apologize if this is redundant, because I know Mr. Scheef was attempting to try to find some place where we could just swap some land. And the issue always came up as to the value of how he saw, he would swap that for Lakeshore over here. And we're just saying, well, let's make this reasonable. And so it's been going on. The park proposal, where did that come from?
That was developed back in kind of between 2016 and 2018. It was kind of a collaborative effort between the city and the county to,
And the majority of that park parcel is owned by who?
It's kind of about split, mostly county. However, it's within city jurisdiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it was a joint effort. So in other words, it's not something informed by the city that the county owns the land.
Essentially, yes, the county owns the land, however, it is within city jurisdiction, so
Right.
everything that's done there would have to be.
Yeah. And so if, it's a discussion relative, do we leave the land or not do something with the land, as far as it relates to Mr. Scheef, is that if because he owns that parcel, he's just saying, well, I'll just keep that parcel if we can't trade. And then I'm gonna build a road in because I have legal right to be able to do that. And so out of a courtesy, he's saying, do you wanna consider, some kind of arrangement here? Because if we build that road, it's going what you're envisioning up there. So that's what I see. If we say, you can have his land and he can build his road in there and do what he wants, because he's a landowner, he's got legal right to do it, and it just, again, the courtesy issues, how is that gonna impact if our vision says build a park there? So if that's the overall picture, the easiest thing, and that's what you brought to us, Bob, is said do nothing. Just do nothing. And let him exercise his right to do that. And if we have development there, we want housing, that it meets that one criteria. The question is what outweighs it relative to priority? I will say, as an executive director for an organization that was on a lake, and some of the decision makers in our county wanted to propose a green park. And all of the meetings were held at the farthest point in the county to try to exclude the people that were affected by their decision. And people were not happy about it. And so I recommended that we would do a brochure that would inform as to the feasibility of environmental parks and access and all of the things. And a lot of research went in and put together, which we paid for and did on behalf of the county, to let all the citizens know what would you like. And the financial feasibility was, there wasn't a lot of that could support it. And so I would say that there are ideas in saying this is good, this is good. If you read the information that comes as a result of the survey and looking, the projectables on that survey, is there are plenty of opportunities. Okay, are there plenty of opportunities? And identify that. I'll just use off the cuff an analogy. If you look in a city and you see how many churches there are on street corners, you say, why does this community need to have so many different churches? And there are reasons, so the analogy might blow up. But I think when we look at this in the big context, I would say that the assumptions that we make on the feasibility, the maintenance, the other issues that have been identified, that it will pay for itself. And if we get the legacy funds, which we're always having to establish credibility between the rural and the urban as to where that money really should be spent. And as far as they're concerned, they should have it all because we don't exist. So we have to have well-reasoned propositions in order to garner some of that money. So if we get the money and we build it, can we sustain it, number one? And it just seems like it's becoming rather encumbered, all of the moving parts here. And so if we did a feasibility study and we look at, if we're meeting a need that doesn't exist, that's one thing. But if we find in our survey that a lot of people feel we have that provision and some of these other things that are problematic would go away because we're not considering this concept that came up when it came up, I would be the opinion, what we're saying, like when they were proposing that we would do the zip line up there. How did that all happen? And where was the feasibility of what that was? He was projecting that umpteen number of people would use that 365 days a week. Having built a course and done that, it's like, you can't do that. Those are wrong projections. So it just seems to me that this is my perspective from that context, that we just let Mr. Scheef do what he would like to do. And you say, okay, what's the negatives of that? If you're going to look at the Bluff and you're going to see a zip line up there, how are we feeling about that? I think that was all related to funding, why that didn't happen. If we look at what development housings, are we going to have a problem with that? If you're going to strip the whole hillside and not be, build it into the hillside so it's not an eyesore. So in that context of what I see, I would just say, because this has been going on how long? I appreciate the respect and willingness to have a voice in it, but from my perspective, I would say, that's it. Let's move on from that, but that's just me. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks, Mitch, for the presentation. I didn't expect that. I thought you were just going to come in and.
There's more if you want to see it too. And dude, just to speak to Gary's point, Commissioner Gamble.
Yeah, that's all right. Gary's fine.
So, yeah, I mean, in looking at the feasibility too, I mean, that's built into kind of the Greater Minnesota's process. You know, I mean, once we get that joint powers agreement and the board formed, that can then go to those guys to go through that process of looking at feasibility and cost and projections and all of that. Additionally, I mean, just from my perspective, if we do let Mr. Scheef do as he wishes, it does, you know, it's going right through the heart of what is drawn out. And that's not to say that we need to be committed to that. However, I mean, again, from my perspective, if we could divert him to the north end of that property and then follow, like, you know, that east lot line, so that it's at least staying out of the heart of the park. And then also, I would, if we're gonna do that, I would also write in that we have access across it, you know, and that we can utilize it for future if we do want to create access on that part of the park. You know, just to ensure that we're not boxing ourselves out, I would say, so. But thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to address your statement where you said there's no point in just, the land has value and there's no point in just letting it sit. There's absolutely every point in letting it sit because of it wasn't that many decades ago when the community had a discussion about the Bluff, and the conclusion was we will never build on the Bluff because of its beauty and because it's distinctive. And it has value for being what it is. So the community has changed over time. We have a greater focus on tourism and on bringing people in for more tourism. And the mindset is not what can often, the impression is not what are we doing for our community, but is this park for the community, which people in the community, or is it just to bring more tourists here? I mean, that's a definite thing, because if you ask people about the YMCA, many people that used to go to the old pool down in they don't go to the YMCA at all because, like everyone's older, times have changed. But the perception is that that place, even though the school has an agreement with it, there are different activities for the community, that it was not built solely for the community. It was built to bring people in. Come to Grand Marais, we have a YMCA. So I'm afraid, or no, I'm not afraid at all. I just believe that this Bluff project, this is another one that unless there's a lot of data produced and a lot of public conversation before decisions are made, it will be tainted. It's my opinion, one person's opinion.
Well, I appreciate your survey because it did show
Yeah.
positivity.
Yep.
So that's step one.
And I've heard this before a couple of years ago that when they started, yes.
Any other thoughts, Commissioner Mills?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I ran for city council was because of the zip line project. It was I believe a 3-vote. That's how it was decided that public land that the community had said would be undeveloped was then developed. And it was like, whoa, okay, so we all might agree that this property should not be developed, but a future board with 3 votes could sell it. You know, it had to be public hearing and a lot of process, but that potential is there, and I find that as a significant threat that has been realized on a smaller scale with that zipline property. So while I was on the city council, I wanted to join the Parks and Trails Commission, which was newly formed by the county. And then this plan was developed. I wasn't as involved. I wasn't on the steering committee, but I was aware of its goings-on and pretty supportive of it, with the idea of preservation. There are other ways to preserve besides a park. We could just put it in conservation easement, our public land in conservation easement, and that may be, boom, done. That might be a solution. One of the other thoughts as a city resident, or used to be, was in order to access the resources in our community, you have to drive nearly everywhere. I mean, I've biked to Pincushion, I've hiked to Pincushion, but that's a significant journey. And so this is in the city limits and pretty accessible. There's all kinds of folks that walk up close to there, at least on the Gunflint Trail, and then do the loop back down. And then there's Sweetheart's Bluff down in the lake, and I think that's a wonderful resource for accessibility within the city too. So I see a lot of value there. I want to recognize the significant concerns about the maintenance costs and even just the development costs. I think those are real. I think we can look to Pincushion to see what some of those costs are. It's maybe more expansive over there, but I think we could learn something about what kind of costs there could be. Personally, I'm not as supportive for a big campground there, like has been mentioned in the plan. I think one of the angles with that was just trying to find a way to pay for maintenance and upkeep, just trying to get some kind of cash flow or revenue going. But clearly that doesn't fit within our community's needs. That is more geared towards visitors. I think a road going in, and if we look at that preferred road, and it's in our packet, it doesn't necessarily have to go on the screen, it looks like it follows the very top of the bluff, like right as close to the edge as you can get. And so I don't think I'd support that. Or maybe there's qualifiers there, but and that does significantly restrict anything that might want to happen if a park is developed. And I think there would be significant hurdles for doing any of it, really. But just seeing some of the money coming into the community and different builds happening, even without utilities, you can build a pretty bomber off-grid system, and that's, the view of that parcel is out of this world, So I could see a big dollar CEO coming and doing that in the not too distant future, maybe not tomorrow or whatever. So I think that risk is real too, as much as it's unfathomable in my personal life or experience. So, and I agree with Commissioner Gamble. It's just so messy, all the ins and outs of it's very difficult to know a good path forward here. I really appreciate the survey results and the presentation. That was well put together very quickly, and that helps give some visuals of those numbers. There's just so much more conversation that needs to happen with the community, I think, about the park project, but I don't want to box us in to just restricting because of a private development. But I can also, having a road go through it, I could see trails crossing the road. I don't see that. And it's not like it's gonna be a high traffic road, so that doesn't kill the project if it is gonna be a project either. Like, there's all kinds of options. I just don't have a clear sense of our best path forward. And, but I just wanted to share that my interest originally was in that preservation, and you can do some pretty low impact trails and still be able to use and appreciate that land. So, but that's not what I think the whole community envisioned. There was you saw all the different aspects there. So,
Is there a timeline for Mr. Scheef from us?
So, thank you, Madam Chair. So I think that, what brought this to the board today, we still haven't even come close to scratching the answer of, we can talk about the Sawtooth Bluff plan in general and how it may be modified and things like that, and how it's paid for, but ultimately we have to kind of have a discussion and lay out the facts for the Scheef access. So there is a lot of things that, you know, within this information that is probably a little bit relevant. If you actually look at the appraisal that was provided by Scheef, one of the things that I wanted to address, you know, it's page 41 in the PDF. If you're in the packet agenda, it's page 33 of the actual appraisal. It states in there that there was no actual estimate for the road, that this was just based off of having general conversations with a few contractors, and they came up with $30 a linear foot to build a road. So we all know that you can't build a mile-long road for that cost. It's not a mile, it's like 3,000 feet plus if you do a direct route. So that you know, there's clearly some things in that appraisal that, you know, it appears to favor Scheef's side of this. You know, we maybe need to step back to, you know, this started back 13 years ago, and back then they were trying to get access. They then, you know, came up with this idea at some point to do the conservation easement. And I want to go back to that conservation easement because we did talk about that a little bit last month, where that might be the best option for us to, you know, consider the Sawtooth Bluff's interest in the project there and still have that land without any real cost to the county, still have that land protected from a development. Going back to that conservation easement, and the reason why I believe it stalled out is under Minnesota Statute 28204, Subdivision 4. The county, if the county was to have granted an access easement, because this was before we knew about the old plat that was uncovered in the court, they would have to have compensated the county the appraised value of the access easement per statute 28204 subdivision 4. This is tax forfeit land, so it's under tax forfeit laws. So that was where, you know, if you want to step back and go back to 2022, we were being told that the county gives Scheef access, and at that point the conversation was at no cost. The county just writes up an easement and says you now have access. The Minnesota Land Trust was going to put a conservation easement, a deed restriction on the property, and in exchange, Scheef would get compensated, and we were told I have the number, it was like $97,000 for enrolling that property in a conservation easement. Then Scheef would donate the remaining interest in the property, which is basically you can't develop it, but you still own the property in a conservation easement, was going to donate that back to the county. And that was what the county, you know, it was pitched to us that that's what we wanted. We don't want a development next to the Sawtooth Bluffs, and we would prefer to have it in a conservation easement over that. So at the end of the day, it was kind of the county gives Scheef something, Scheef is then able to sell the conservation easement, the rights to develop the land, and then donate the land, which that may have also come with some additional, you know, I don't know if there was additional tax benefits with the donation. But ultimately what it boiled down to is that, you know, if Scheef was to get an easement from the county, he would have to compensate us. And the value of that easement became pretty evident when Scheef said, well, I will not do the conservation easement without access because then they're not going to compensate me as much. So it seems to me that there was an offset there, that if the county is giving Scheef access, the value of what we're giving him is then going back into his pocket in that conservation easement. So that's just another piece of going back to that conservation easement, that if the county was to give a conservation easement, we can't just do it for free. It says it has to be the appraised value because this land is under statutes of tax forfeit land, 282. Also under 282, after reading the statute further, it says, you know, under 282 subdivision 4A, the county can grant access easements across tax forfeit land. That's something we have the right to do. We can also grant electrical easements across tax forfeit land. But if at any point in time those easements become a conflict with the use of the public use of that land, we can cancel those easements. And I believe that is a special exception for tax forfeit properties. I don't know that you can just cancel an easement after it's been granted, other than under Minnesota Statute 28204. So that's another thing that probably could have been considered back when we were having these conversations with the land trust about, give them an easement, they'll never actually develop it, but that in turn increases the value of the property, and then they're able to compensate more for it. Lastly, under 28204, it says that any easement across tax forfeit lands must be used, and that in the event of non-use, the easement would be canceled. So when the Minnesota Land Trust was saying that, we're not actually going to develop the road, but we need that easement to review the value, in reality, if that would have gone forward, the easement eventually would have been, or could have been, canceled by the county because of non-use. So there maybe was a protection there that we weren't really familiar with, that if we had pursued that route. But I think that all fell flat when it came up that we would have to be compensated, and that compensation was not minor, because the whole deal wasn't going to go forward if Scheef didn't get the access with the land trust because of a value issue, because of where the value would be versus where it was at without access. So that's very important in the conversation of why this never went through back in '22. Now, the board could try and engage the Minnesota Land Trust. As far as I understand it, they are not in conversations currently with Mr. Scheef, but if the county board was to bring them back to the table, that's what I was to understand, is that they would come back to the table for those conversations. Now, what's strange to me is that, now Scheef has a judge order, a ruling that he does have legal access, and that's really all that they wanted for that conservation easement. So I'm not sure why that hasn't come back, to the Minnesota Land Trust, and why, through the Munson and Pierce plat, they're not looking at that as legal access and, the value of his property then. On the other hand, the more recent conversations we've had with Scheef and his representation is that they have presented us with a subdivision. It's ready to be filed with the recorder's office. Everything, all the paperwork is drafted up and signed, and it just needs to be recorded. They would subdivide it into 8 10-acre lots, roughly. That to me is sending a message that's saying, we're going to move forward with this. There was also some language that would suggest that, the valuation that I had come up with in contrast to their appraisal wasn't acceptable, and that we were actually told we shouldn't even be having conversations of exchange or purchase with that number if the board is going to rely so heavily on that number. And I think, Rowan had communicated back to them that, that number isn't the board's final end number. That number is based off of data that I provided for the board to use as consideration. I mean, if you look at the assessed value is higher than that comp grid. What I did with that comp grid was I literally just replaced some of their comparables and then used the same adjustments that they used, which I think points out the fact that some of those adjustments aren't good. They're not big enough adjustments. They're not accounting for differences in a 9 or a 5 acre parcel to an 80 acre parcel. You don't see the acreage rate. And I think the biggest adjustment on that for the difference in size of the comps was 30%. So you add 30% or you subtract 30% from the per acre rate on a 5 acre parcel. It's not how an appraisal, when I look at it, I think that it's not a good appraisal. And if it was in a tax court setting, I would argue against a lot of the things in it. But also the fact that it establishes that number like 690,000 or 680,000, and then they subtract out 170,000 for road and utility, which isn't even based off of an estimate. I mean, that would go nowhere in tax court. You would have to actually have a sworn contractor's estimate for that to have any relevance in an appraisal, in my opinion. $30 a linear foot up on the Sawtooth Bluffs, where there is, maybe if there was an existing road that they just had to clean up, which I understand their preferred route does follow, part of the way follows some old logging road or something, but it doesn't go the entire length. It doesn't go the last 100 feet or more, maybe 1,000 feet. But, what I really want the board to look at, and, Commissioner Gamble had kind of touched on it, is that do nothing option. Right now, we're being told that if we don't do anything, they're going to put a road in across the plat. and that's more disruptive than if we were to grant access through a more preferred route, which I think does follow that bluff edge. If you look at the contours on the map, it kind of follows that bluff edge. And, I think that, so again, the whole reason why we're here is because the Sawtooth Bluffs is something that we're not just saying, yeah, go ahead and put a road in. It's not like any other land where the board is going to look at it and say, well, that, why does that really bother us? But because of the Sawtooth Bluff Master Plan, we have to do a little bit more due diligence and look at this. Is it going to impact it? And I again, go back to what Mills said, is a couple of roads crossing those hiking trails, is that really disruptive? I go on the snowmobile trail all the time. I cross roads here and there. Hiking trails, cross-country ski trails, we all cross roads, they intersect. It's hard to find a big chunk of woods where there's not a road going through. So that's ultimately the question the board, I think today, that the board should really look at and question is, if Scheef was to go in and put a road across the Pierce, Munson Platte, is that going to be super detrimental to the Sawtooth Bluffs? And if so, the board does have some options to offer a reroute, maybe being less disruptive. I know, Mitch had pulled up a drawing that would route it more northernly and follow more border parcels. Obviously, that's going to come with more cost to Scheef. And I think let's say the board was to decide, a month from now that that's the best solution, is we want to give him an access route that is less disruptive to Sawtooth Bluffs, not their preferred route, but our preferred route. Scheef could still come along and say, well, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use the public dedication roadways, if he finds that that's going to be less cost, if it's going to be more cost effective. For him to do that, I would imagine that's what he's going to do, because I think at the end of the day, this is all about Scheef, getting rid of his asset. He wants to cash that in. He wants to move on from it. He wants to do something else with his capital. So, interesting, Scheef paid $240,000 back in 2005 for that parcel. Right now, for 24, it was assessed right around 175, and for 2024, or for 2025, without any kind of changes, it's assessed at 236.8. So it's almost what he paid for it. And I do think that number has relevance too, because this is entered into the system the same way every taxpayer is entered into the system. So regardless of the comp grid, that again is using their appraiser's adjustments with better comps, just to show, that there are multiple ways of looking at property value. That's, every appraiser is going to come up with a different number. It's an opinion. But the assessed value might be relevant too to the conversation, the value of that lot. But given all of the facts and all of the things that we've talked about with, what could potentially happen if the board does nothing, and the interest that the public has in the Sawtooth Bluffs, is there any other questions that I can answer before the board does take action on this at some point, say it's next month or the following month? Because I know that Tyson and John Scheef they want to get this thing moving along.
Okay, just take a pause in respecting our time. We also have the potential of having a special meeting in terms of administrative talk. So does anybody have 1 o'clock meetings? No? Nope, okay. Then we'll continue. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for all the work. Number one, it's just a pile of paperwork. And so I appreciate that commitment. If I were to, and in discussions probably has been the question, what is the outcome that John wants? What's the outcome? In other words, I'm just going to say this, you don't have to respond to it, but I'm just saying we should identify what is his intention. And then he's saying, I know what my intention is, but because I understand, I respect, the plan and this and that, the other thing, I'm willing to work with you, and here's some options. So we're having this discussion. The question was asked earlier, so What's his timeline? Well, it's been a lot of years, and he's looked at it a lot of different ways, and we can look and say, there's a lot of questions to be asked, and there's a lot of things we need to do and whatever else, but if I were home watching this and I were John, I'd be going, you've got to be kidding me. And because he doesn't have to, number one, legally. He's willing to try to work with us if we say, well, here's what we want, because here's John's want, here's our want. Our want and assumption is that we want to build a park up there. That's the only thing that's holding this up, as I see it. And if I'm wrong on that, then I'm certainly willing to get a different perspective. So if our what if assumption, and if to say the community wants it, well, if we take a survey and we don't see that there's significant response, like we want this, then that should inform our decision. So if we look at the feasibility study and the projections, which again I participated in with making these things financially viable, these parks, when we've got what we've got, people have more choices. It's not the only thing that they have to choose to go to. And so if you said, my willingness, John, my willingness to try to work with you, recognizing what you want, and we say, well, we'd like you to route it this way, it's going to cost you some more money, then that's a discussion to be had. But from my perspective, in the context of what I understand and looking at what you shared in statistical, we're making assumptions and projecting them with an outcome that we might be focused on, which is not really necessarily reality. And I think this thing, and out of respect to John, and the fact that he's in a legal position to do it, he wouldn't have to say anything to us. But he's done that as a courtesy. Now, and I could be wrong in that regard. But if he said, well, you know, nothing's happening, this and that and the other, so I checked the rule of law, judge says, yeah, you can do it. And he's saying, well, here's the thing then. Do you guys want to da-da-da-da-da-da-da? We say, well, we got this hold on to what we want. Do we really want that? Is it supported, to your point? And if we just said, when I say do nothing, you know, the do nothing, the only element there that I think is not answered is that, is there a better route if in fact what we are envisioning would take place? The negative of that is it's going to cost him more to do that. So every decision is made in the context of what our parameters are, and that's what you've put before us based upon state statute. I would say the feasibility of a park and how much we really locally want that park, that's debatable. It could be definable if we want to take a democratic approach to it. But as encumbered as this has been, and out of respect to Mr. Scheef and everything else, my opinion, if I were voting on it before us right now, is let him go ahead. Let him go ahead. And if you look at the wetlands issue, and you look at these other issues that he has to comply with, if in his assessment he's looked at all of that, then he's done his due diligence, so it's just our want that's in the way of his want. Anyway, that's my...
So Tim has joined us for his insight.
Yeah, I see pulled up, I don't see any crackers and pickles, so I don't know how good...
That is correct. And thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to speak anecdotally about Sawtooth Bluffs. We have two major issues on the table, of course. That's to John Scheef and the property, what he wants to do with the property, and we have Sawtooth Bluffs. When I got here, a little over 25 years ago, we had what was the old Ski Hill plan. That sat around, nothing happened. We talked about it. There was a whole group that got together and talked about it. That nothing really happened to that. In that time, since that time, there had been discussions about putting a technical school up in that area. There had been discussions about putting a recreational park kind of in that area. There had been talks about doing nothing in that particular area. And then it was 2016, so about 10 years after that we start talking about the Sawtooth Bluffs. Now, the major one of the major points about the Sawtooth Bluffs kind of approach was that we were going to set aside, and it's kind of a projection of possibilities of how the recreation and how things could fit up in that area. But it was kind of destined or designed so that user groups in and of themselves would be the ones approaching the county to get these things kind of moving and approaching. And now it's been more than, or 10 years since we have come up with that plan. And the dog park was really good in being able to approach it outside of the point where we had even approved the plan and formed a joint powers board. The next point on that plan was to form a joint powers board with the city to be able to control and regulate and kind of get an infrastructure going and get all of that moving. And the reason why I'm saying that is that in this county and in the more than 25 years that I've been here, I've noticed that things do kind of change, and people do have changes and ideas in terms of how they want to approach things, and how many times over the course of the years, Mitch, have we had the discussion, and Dave, have we had the discussion about there's a whole list of action items in the back of the Sawtooth Bluffs plan that are tasks that need to be done that haven't been done and haven't been addressed and are slated by user groups of things that are supposed to be going on and happening and have not happened. And so one thing that I just want to throw out there is the fact that there may be a whole lot more discussion and a whole lot more evaluation, and we had talked about this as well, and is why Mitch even started in this process in terms of kind of going back and reevaluating and looking at all of the action plans and action items and the user groups and the use of that particular area. Are we still at that same spot where we want to be? And how does that impact, you know, the use of Mr. Scheef being able to do this property or not? They're two kind of distinct items. Yes, they're merged in terms of one's impact on the other, but the strongest one kind of seems to be that Sawtooth Bluffs, the use of that area, and the fact that even when decisions are made, whole plans are done, we take months, several months, and we go through big plans, and we get the committees together, and we adopt by the county board of commissioners, and we're ready to go on this. And 10 years afterwards, we've done nothing on that. And the thing that has been done, and quite successfully, has been the dog park, which was again done without the use of the joint powers board to begin with. So we have had some discussions with the city about their interest in it, and you know, they've kind of gone back and forth in terms of you know, their involvement and how involved they would be in like a campgrounds. We had talked about the campgrounds and infrastructure and everything, and there's a whole lot of logistics that would have to go into the construction of that. So I think at this point there really does need to have a whole lot more discussion about that Sawtooth Bluffs area in order to even almost make a decision about the this road and pass-through thing. I'm almost of the move that, you know, if we don't do anything, that does it leave it open for John to be able to do what he does, which he can do anyway. So I guess that's all I wanted to throw out there, kind of anecdotally.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate that. There's a lot of want to, but can we? And the reality is we can't continue to hold him hostage to our delays. He has a recourse, and we just appreciate the fact that he's tried to involve us and make us aware in what it is. I think you have to look at the risk issue, and the risk issue and evaluation is related to which course does the access come. And if I'm a businessman, I'm going to take it as cheap as I can get it, with all of the structures that are in place that protect against watersheds, environment, this and that, runoffs, all whatever. You got to go through those hoops. But ours is, it would be nice if you're willing to do this and pay more money. And if he as a citizen says, hey, I'm willing to do that,
But he says, no, I appreciate the discussion, whatever, and I need to move forward because I can't be held hostage to your delays. And then let them get the access. We can't hold them hostage, and sometimes delaying is a tactical approach to try to discourage somebody from getting done what they want to do. And we don't want to do that. But like I say, if you want to do a feasibility study, if you want to get all of the user groups and everybody else involved in the decision and ruminate over this again, and he's saying, okay, I'll let you do that, but I haven't had a lot of success with that. And it becomes more like a delay tactic. I give you opportunity, but where's the response? So I would just say, given where we are with beautiful land and resources in this county, we don't need that. We're going to be competing with ourselves. And I don't think it's going to be financially feasible. And I could go through, I'd do another study now with all of the parks that were proposed, and it's because I had legislators that want to have a park that have their name on it in our particular county. That is not a reason to do that. And we have to find the balance between serving tourists and serving our public as well. Because we've been sold on many things that if we do this, just build it and they will come. And it hasn't happened. And it ends up being a burden on the tax, not only from a financial standpoint, but from a quality of life standpoint.
Commissioner Mills?
Just a couple things that for me, it's not really about a park. The park was a vehicle for conservation. I see advantages to a park in that it is attractive for residents. I'm not looking to attract visitors. That's not who elected me to represent them. I'm here to work for our community. But if it's a park or not, there is still the risk of that development, and that is something I hear loud and clear from the community, that they do not want eyesores on the hillside or development, or even if it's a beautiful development, just keeping it in its most natural setting as possible. And so I just want to recognize it's not just about a park, and it's not about bringing in visitors. This is more about serving our community and preserving its natural beauty. I also just want to bring into context that I do not want to hold anyone hostage. I do not want to delay by any means. And John Mr. Scheef has every right to go ahead and do this. And I really do appreciate his patience and his perseverance. It should also be noted that the ruling for the easement is very recent. So as long as it's been going on, he actually did not have any rights until this ruling. And so it's a new development that is allowing, a new ruling, a new development in the situation that's allowing for this. And so the past conversations haven't really been, that length of time was really not on us, or that was the law, or the interpretation of the law. And so, yeah, he may just do what he needs to do, but it was originally his intention to keep it as kind of natural as a green space. He also wants to cover his costs, of course. So there's the both and they can be competing, but I just know that his values are in both of those camps too. So there is a balance that needs to be found. Again, I honestly do not know the best path forward. I mean, we could even do a combination of things. If we do approach the state for a conservation easement, and it's not enough for Mr. Scheef to feel like he's getting enough, we could pitch in another X number of dollars or whatever, if that guarantees the preservation of it, if that's where our values are, or not. But there's a lot of options, and time is, I think, very short. Just my understanding of where they're at on their end of things. So maybe we won't be maybe we are too encumbered to be able to take any action, and then by default, it is do nothing. But it's just, I want to make sure we can be as intentional as we can to serve the community.
Having
Madam
heard all
Chair?
these comments and suggestions and so forth, what would be your recommendation, Bob, to move forward?
So I don't know that I have a direct recommendation. I think that all of those options could still be on the table. I think that if, I hear from Commissioner Mills that there's protecting the beauty of the hillside aspect of this. And, maybe that requires the county acquire this property from Scheef, because as of right now, I believe the only option is that there's a road going in there. It's where is the road going in? Because according to the attorney, that the number that I had come up with on evaluation on that comp grid was not even worth discussing. So, maybe we need Scheef to offer his property. What's the price? He needs to list the price. If that's one of the options we're going to consider. Also, this conservation easement, I can reach out to the Minnesota Land Trust and see if that might still be something that they're interested in pursuing. It may require all new appraisals and everything, because, since 2022 and the valuation that they had from October of 22, things have changed. It's possible that Scheef gets compensated more from them, given the state of the market. But at the end of the day, what's kind of puzzling to me, other than this appreciation since 22, is, looking at what Scheef was going to be compensated by the conservation easement, and then give up all of the rights to the property afterwards. What I had on that comp grid would have compensated him almost $40,000, $30,000 more than what he would have gotten back then in his pocket. So I'm kind of curious if there's also a tax element to that, like a income tax element that I'm not considering, that maybe there was a benefit that I didn't know about in the donation of the remaining rights. But at the end of the day, I think all of the options are still on the table. I do think the do nothing option, because obviously without action at a future board meeting, that's what we're doing. We're doing nothing. The likelihood, and I don't want to say I'm an expert on this. I think I want to leave it up to all of you to decide the likelihood that a road gets put in is the likelihood that a road gets put in, given the value of the land, it just, to me, doesn't seem likely. Number one, it would have to, currently it would have to follow that plat, and I think that there's a lot of expense involved in developing along that plat. According to Land Services, it requires these environmental assessments and engineered stormwater plans. I mean, $30 a foot doesn't come close to what it's going to cost to get a road put in there. And, I just, that's my personal opinion on it, is that I don't think that the estimated road costs in the appraisal is reflective of what it would cost, no matter what route he was taking, even if he gets the preferred route that follows a former road bed. I still think it's going to be over $30 a front foot with all of these environmental impact plans and engineered stormwater design plans, and the cost of getting somebody physically out there to start working on it. It's just, it's going to exceed those estimates in the appraisal. So, the risk of doing nothing is that trees start coming down and gravel starts going in along those plats across the Sawtooth Bluff. But that's where you have to kind of step back and ask yourself, is that so detrimental that now the Sawtooth Bluff plan can't go forward? I mean, I don't know that it is. Yeah, we would prefer not to have roads going through there, but, maybe that ends up being the best place to park to access the trails. I don't know.
The reality is, there's always going to be people out there with a lot of money. They'll put it in the road, infrastructure, if they want it, and then they'll build what people with equal amounts of money want to do. We cannot own all the real estate in this county, so we have to make a decision which parts we want to hold for our community, and give, if he owns it and he wants to develop it, that's how it is. I mean, it's It's like, I wish I didn't have neighbors so close, but I couldn't afford to buy more acreage at the time, you know, and so that's just how it is. And so I believe the beauty of that geography up there, it's more than just the visual of the whole thing. There's a magnificent, I'm not going to wax poetic on this, but I really appreciate his patience and his offer for trying to protect that, as it were. But he needs to go on and make a decision without us. You know, I'm like, tell us what you want for us, and then we'll talk about it, because that's my, at this point.
And Madam Chair, right now, Scheef is asking us to grant a preferred access route. So he is asking us to grant a preferred access route, and the risk that they've proposed, or posed, that the board would take of not giving the preferred route is that it follows the plat, which they claim to be more disruptive. You know, I'm not gonna say whether or not it is or not, isn't. I haven't been up to the top of the hill. I mean, I think it's more difficult to develop because there isn't an existing road bed along that plat, like there is the preferred route. So I think that really what we're being told is, you know, we need to make it easier for them and more efficient for them. Otherwise, it's gonna be more disruptive that when they use the existing legal routes.
So do we go ahead and publicly at a board meeting release it and do nothing? Just let them do it? Or what would you recommend then by the do-nothing approach? Oh, Rowan.
You know, if I could, the other thing that they've stated to us, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, here, but Mr. Scheef's first priority, if, you know, we put them in order, would be that the county does buy it. And the difference there is that we said at the beginning of the conversation is just in what we see it as assessed at and what it's been appraised at. And so I think, you know, just to summarize that component and to, as many commissioners have said, appreciation of his willingness to offer us this consideration because of so many things we've talked about, the view shed, how do we want to really make investments, whether it's a park or other ways to conserve that area, and that he's aware of that. He knows that that's been a conversation over several years, and so, you know, that the access is the next components there, but I think his first ask or first priority that him and his representatives, would they come in and talk to the board, is here's why we think it's valuable, here's why we think it's important, here's why we started down the road with the Conservation Trust, Minnesota Land Trust, and, you know, that, for all those different reasons we've talked about, that's not where we're at right now, but as kind of a last offer before we move forward with pursuing development and the road and the other things, does the county want to take a shot at purchasing this, or even some type of exchange? But the conversations that Bob's alluded to that we've had with them following the meeting was that we're pretty far apart on assessed value and what they came up with appraised value. And so I just want to make sure that that's clear for the board in the decision making about, you know, how the board goes forward. Do we want to have Mr. Scheef and his representatives come in and give us more information from their perspective, or follow through with more of a do-nothing approach? And I think Bob articulated kind of the risk there really well. I mean, with all the options, I think that one carries the most risk, because it gives us less control over where that access goes, and there is at least the potential that somebody with the capital would look at it and say, I can make the return on investment by doing this. And and just last final thought is that I think in the context that we've had and talked about housing, based on the cost of a road and all the other things, I don't think that's the type of housing that would end up there that we've talked about in needing for the community. So that's.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, if we were going to bullet point it like the Highway Department did for us, that The reality is, we've got 92% of government-owned land right now. And we don't want to be taking land that is on the tax roll and acquiring more government land. That's one bullet point. The other bullet point to what it would cost to build a road, and as you alluded to, Rowan, an investor who does his homework and has a history and wants to make money isn't going to, in most cases, make a foolish decision, which means I'm going to evaluate my costs, I'm going to evaluate my projections, and I can afford to pay that because I know what the return on my investment is going to be. As to the housing issue, we talked about affordable housing up here for a number of different reasons, but if you want to look at affordability for the majority of the work file up here, the workforce, our housing is not affordable. It is not affordable. And if we have people, and I've said it very often, the people that come up are people that have earned their wealth elsewhere and choose to retire here. What kind of housing do they want? So if you say, well, we have a need, which is we need to increase tax base because we are a county that has way too much property that isn't getting us a return, and every time we turn around, we got to negotiate to try to hold them accountable to a good in faith assessment when it comes to PILT. And so I'm just saying, it might not be the house that we're looking at, but let's look at the demographics. Let's look at who we're attracting. How many people are saying, you got money up here, but I don't have money? And yet, if that's what's happening, then there is housing that they want too. And if we provide it, they won't buy up our affordable housing that's being bought up that's been here. So I think looking at all those context things, and given the appreciation, if he sells to an investor, we don't know what that relationship is with the investor as to trying to make something that is environmentally, working with what we want to see in that hill. But in the context of the rule of law and what we have, ordinances and everything else, if people are adhering to that, they have the right to do what they want to do in that regard. And if we say, well, we want it to look pretty when we look up there, and we're willing to buy that land with wherever that money comes from, and we're being contradictory to things that we say we value, there's a problem with that. So there are people that have a lot of money that could contribute to our tax base, which would lessen the levy burden, and if they can do it and it looks okay because the trees are growing and they don't just level the hillside, I think we can look at all of the values and put it in a context that says, this isn't really that much of an issue. So every decision, and the greater the risk, the more it needs to be evaluated. What are the benefits? What are what do we lose here? And sometimes the discussion and the amount of time we've invested in this has made this a mountain out of a molehill. And the reason that Mr. Scheef, we say this is new information, it's because you have an individual that's looking at his options in the context of the rule of law. And if nothing is happening, I'm going to go get somebody else that defines the rule of law. And so that's an indication in itself that he's trying to be resourceful because he's not getting any action. So whether that happened currently or not, it says to me, this is the guy that's going to pursue because he's not seeing a lot of action here. So I just think we can't always look at things through this one lens because there are other elements that we need to do. And when we had a proposal before the board that we wanted to get federal monies to buy up some of our school tax lands, well, the Wilderness Act says you can't do that. But we're going to subjectively interpret the rule of law to get what we want. Well, you can't do that. And the other thing is we can't give up jurisdiction. So there are a lot of things that enter into a decision. And in this, I would say, if we can create tax base, not lose and make it, something that's fear-mongering relative to what's going to happen to that hillside, I just say look at in that context.
To Administrator Rowan's comment about having Mr. Scheef come before the board. Is that something out of respect for him that would be helpful?
Yes, Madam Chair, I think that would be the next step. And to answer your question before we got into that conversation is, the do-nothing option, there wouldn't need to be any action taken. I mean, then it would just kind of play itself out. I think if we, reach out to Mr. Scheef and say, the board would like to have a conversation, I'm curious if we want to kind of lay some groundwork to that. Are we having a conversation about purchase price? Are we having a conversation about preferred access easements?
Exactly right.
If the board wanted to, say, well, let's not use the plat, let's not use that route, let's go this easier route that's less disruptive, the board we could have something drafted up to do that at any meeting. I do think we should bring Scheef in to have a conversation. I do think the question should be asked is, what would you like if the board was offering to pay for this? What would you like as an offer? I also think that, I'm hearing a lot of, we want to protect the hillside from development for beauty reasons, but at the same time, I'm hearing that maybe we shouldn't be interfering with development regardless of if it's affordable or not affordable housing. It's maybe something that the board doesn't want to prevent from happening. But I do think that conservation easement is maybe one of the alternatives that kind of checks a lot of the boxes. As far as I understand it, it's no money out of the county's budgets to pursue that. If the Minnesota Land Trust was still interested and Scheef still wanted to work with them, we could certainly engage and see if, they can put an offer on the table that Scheef's interested in. And then it goes back to those questions that stalled it out in 2022. On tax forfeit land, we can issue an access easement, and the Minnesota Land Trust told us all along that they never intended to build that road, but there was never a guarantee. It was they had the right. They could have went in with a bulldozer and chopped down exactly along the preferred route. I think that maybe engaging the Land Trust and seeing if that's another alternative. I think that if we were to put this on a board agenda in April or May, we could have an answer from them. Although they again, and John would probably be the one pushing for it, is a revaluation to see what he would be compensated for the conservation easement and if that still interests him. John may very well have a developer. I know that there was a project in town here that didn't go through, and there's likely developers out there looking for something like this, but the question is, to what is the value to that developer? As of right now, they have legal access along a not so desired route. As far as I'm aware, they don't have an access or an easement to put electricity into the property. So then you have additional development costs and, potentially doing solar systems or something along those lines. So that's why this thing has drug out so long, I think. And now that, there's this ruling from the courts, something's going to happen. Either a developer is going to get that property from John, and then what happens, likely a residential development, or the board can step in and pursue the conservation easement or the purchase. But I do think if we grant that preferred access easement, the only thing the county gets out of that is that he's saying it's a less disruptive route. That's what we would be getting out of granting that easement. And at the same time, I think we would be granting him electricity utility easement that he doesn't currently have, so we would be giving him something of value. And according to 28204, we should be compensated for anything we give him on tax forfeit land.
So would you be able to accomplish this in about 6 to 8 weeks?
I think, yeah.
Or let us know about the time frame?
I think we certainly could if there's a meeting in April that's not as busy. I don't know if the first or second meeting is more appropriate for this, but I think I can reach out to the Minnesota Land Trust and have an answer pretty relatively, within a week or two, I would imagine, if they're still willing to engage. And certainly we can reach out to Mr. Scheef and just say, hey, we want, you to come to a board meeting in April or May and kind of tell the board your side of the story, give your perspective and lay it out there. But I don't think that the board has to worry that trees are gonna start coming down. At this point, I think it is cost prohibitive at this point to put in a road without a utility easement and following that 90-degree meandering path. I think that there would be a little bit of hesitation from a developer to pursue that.
One final comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair, appreciate it. I mean, this is a public meeting, so discussion. When you say, you know, the benefit to us is this, that we get a preferred route, and it's like, what do we get out of it? And we look at it and we say that with tax forfeited land, we should be compensated. If you want to look at the business park, if anybody wants to look at the business park, if you want to look at communities that say, in order to generate revenue that would be tax base, we're willing to da-da-da-da-da. That is another element that could be looked at. And we could, in the discussion, if it's a development, if it's not Mr. Scheef making the development, but a developer looking at the price point of the house that they'd be putting in there, we can run some numbers and say, this is actually, you know, what that would do to our tax base, which is something that should be looked at in that regard. And if you're looking at just saying, you know, when it comes to putting it in land trust, that's it. I mean, then it speaks to our issues saying, you don't have to ever worry about look at the Suzie Islands. So, you know, we put it all in land trust. That's because we just want to keep it the way it is and pristine. And if that's what we want to do, that's what we want to do. If you identify all of the things that are going to be impacted by this final decision, just weigh those based upon a priority, but be sure you're looking at inclusivity and not just, you know, picking out what we want to focus on. So my comment about the public meeting. Let's say that we're negotiating, and some of the tactical in negotiating is something that we hear behind the back door, but we don't know openly because that conversation isn't being had openly. But it might be that it is a form of saying, well, I'll do this, which is pushing us into a position to make a decision because we fear this particular outcome, which may or may not be a reality, but it could be a tactical thing that is used to try to influence a decision. And I say that respectfully, only because generically, does it happen? You bet it happens. So I'm just saying, you know, if our trust relationship is what our trust relationship overall, and certainly this has been a forbearing process, but I just say, look at all of identified issues, make sure we're coming at it from a stewardship responsibility, weigh the pros and cons, and trust that we're all operating in good faith.
So you can keep myself posted, Commissioner Mills, the administrator, and let us know if you need some more conversation.
Perfect. I will do that, and we'll plan on, you know, we'll touch base with Mr. Scheef, and we'll see, you know, if April or May, what works better for him. I'll reach out to the Minnesota Land Trust and see if they are still interested in pursuing that 2022 agreement, and, you know, then we'll have to get into the details of looking at that conservation easement. Are we comfortable with it? You know, I know that was something we had talked about a month ago, and if you look at it, there was one thing I wanted to point out. It's actually page 61 in the PDF, page 13 of that conservation easement. That's where the responsibilities fall on the owner, and, you know, it even says in there that the land trust, you know, if they have legal expenses or if they have to send somebody up there to tear down a tree stand, they can bill it to the owner, because that's what the agreement is. So I don't know if, you know, we're talking about a $200,000+ property potentially, and the county might consider acquiring that property. And then, you know, what, in contrast to the conservation easement, the risks are, you know, we might have some management costs, or we might have some, you know, significantly less using county resources going that route, where it's not an out-of-pocket expense to acquire that with the conservation easement. It does take in those protecting the hillside and the visual of the Sawtooth Bluff. It protects the master park plan. So, you know, that, to me, seems like it's kind of the option that is less disruptive. You know, the one thing it doesn't have with that is the tax base growth and additional development up there for residential, but we'll certainly follow that and see if that's an option for our next meeting where we bring Scheef into. And, you know, I would imagine if that is still an option, it would be something that the board would probably consider pretty closely versus, you know, ponying up $200,000+ or something to buy the property.
Very restrictive though. But if your number one priority is just don't do anything, then.
Right, and then the do nothing, you know, that's where it could easily come back to, well, now there's a road being put in and they are subdividing and developing it, so.
Okay, so thank you, Bob and Mitch and Tim and Neva for the great perspective and more work to be heard.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, we'll see you guys in a month or so, or month or two.
Great, thanks. So we have our minutes of the standing committees for information only. We do cover the Airport Advisory, the Budget and Facilities Advisory, Building Committee, Highway Advisory Committee, and we are adjourned. And if you want to take a couple of 5 minutes, that doesn't mean 10. No, take 5. Take 5. And we'll move into our special meeting.